Welcome to the Unit 1 review. So, last week we saw two adaptations of the same original fairy tale. We did this so we could get the concept of adaptation, like how it works, what modes and strategies it utilizes, how people misconceive of adaptation, the myths, and what is really true about adaptation. So, the two main points that I want you to understand from Unit 1 are what textual analysis is and how to do it. That's one of the main things. Textual analysis is figuring out what message the text sends, right? And how it's sending that message. So that's one of the main things from Unit 1 I want you to get. And then the second big thing from Unit 1 is every adaptation changes the message of the original. It has to. It's impossible for it not to do that. So part of the reason that there is a myth of fidelity, right, is that it's impossible to adapt something without changing the message in some way. That's why it's false to believe that adaptations should be judged by the original, which is what the myth of fidelity is, right? Like it's not like the original, so therefore it's bad. Well, it may or may not be bad, but it's never going to be just like the original because it's changing media from one medium to another. So it's impossible to adapt something without changing the message in some way. So then for us to judge the adaptation by a standard that is physically impossible to meet because of the nature of adaptation, that's a little bit naive and maybe a little unfair, right? So that's why it's a myth. Okay.
The form that something is in impacts the content that it has. So if you change something from a book to a film to a television show to a song to a comic, if you're changing the form, that necessitates the content being changed in some way. So the message is going to be different no matter what. There's something essential that stays the same in an adaptation, right? Some kind of story elements or plot elements or character elements, but the message is never going to be the exact same in an adaptation as in the original because you have to change things when you change the form. That's the whole point of learning about the 4 strategies of adaptation from Hutchin, is that when you change the form, if you add things, if you subtract things, if you substitute things, if you distill or compress things, this impacts the content. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. The form and the content are intimately connected. If you change the form, you change the content. You cannot separate the two things. So an adaptation always has a different message than its original. Hastings, in their discussion of how the Disney adaptation changes the original, Hastings falls into the trap of the myth of fidelity, right? So Hastings is suggesting that Disney's text is not as good as the original because it's not the same as the original. Well, that, according to Hutchin, is an example of falling into the trap of the myth of fidelity. An adaptation is not going to be the same as the original. And so for us to then say the adaptation is worse because it's not the same is absurd. What Hastings gets right is that there is a difference in the messages between the book and the film. But you get to decide which one you like better. It's not automatically that Disney's worse because it changed the message. Of course it changed the message. It had to change the message. But you get to decide which message do you like best. Or maybe you like them all.
So the literary podcast tests you on your ability to create an argument and support it with textual evidence. And by you having to come up with a different argument for each text in Unit 1, which is what I asked you to do, you were also engaging in a practical application of this truth, the fact that every adaptation changes the original message. Okay, so that's Unit 1. That's really the most important thing to get from Unit 1.
Keep it up. You can do this. Good job.